guys, welcome back to my completely redesigned channel. You might have noticed I have a new logo, a new intro, and a new everything. The name stayed the same because it's still CupOfKae and I am Kay. If you followed me before the rebranding happened, you know that I started to kind of dig into ghost stories from my past, things that I had experienced as a kid, and I thought that it would be fun to just do something that I'm passionate about, which is talking about the paranormal and ghost stories. So I thought that we could focus on that. I still want to do book reviews and talk about that, but primarily what I want to do is start by telling things that I've experienced, and then maybe branch out into talking about some of the things that have happened in history, maybe in the early 1800s, 1900s. We'll just see where it takes us. But I'm really excited about the new focus, and I hope that you are too. So without further ado, I will start with the story of the Merlin house. If you followed me before the rebrand, I did start to tell this story a little bit. You'll notice the only difference really is that I've told it in a little bit more of a storyteller style. I wrote it out just to make sure that I have the details correct, and I did a little bit more research. So nothing has been changed in this story from fact, from the way that I experienced it. But this is just kind of the intro into how I got introduced unwillingly into the paranormal. So let's start. I have been haunted by something, a shadow person, spirit, whatever you want to call it, since I was a little girl. It began in an old house on a hill, and this was the start of what led me down a terrifying and fascinating journey into the paranormal, one where I was equal parts terrified and elated. The house was unassuming. It was a huge farmhouse on a few acres tucked up against a hillside of an equally unassuming community, Merlin, Oregon. Merlin is this small former farming community outside of Grants Pass, Oregon, which is in southern Oregon. My family and I had just moved to Merlin for my mom's work. She got a job in the town. And this house was amazing. The upstairs of the old farmhouse had originally been an attic, and it had been converted into two huge bedrooms, one each for my sister and myself. I was about 5 years old when we moved into the house, and I was elated at the size of my bedroom. The view of the forest and the fields, and there was this old walnut tree that was right outside the window where the squirrels were constantly in there trying to eat and forage, and it was almost like an idyllic location. And what I didn't know at the time is that this dream house and this dream room for me as a little kid would be my lifelong nightmarescape, and something that I continue to have nightmares about to this day. So to start, let's go back to the 1990s. My family had just moved into this house. We were getting settled in. It was a huge house. It was older but amazing for me as a kid. And I remember I drew chalk on the sidewalk outside, and I pretended that big old walnut tree was Grandmother Willow from Pocahontas. And my room was huge, so I would build these huge forts for my Barbies in my room, and I was up there playing all the time. And my sister didn't live with us for most of this timeline yet. She lived at her dad's for the majority of it, but I was often upstairs by myself playing then. And there were no other rooms in the upstairs besides my and my sister's room and a small little bathroom in between them. I'm not exactly sure when things started to happen because it was so long ago, but I can tell you without a doubt that something was in that house, and it didn't want me there, or it wanted me to stay, because when I left, it followed. The area of Merlin, Oregon that we moved to was part of the Pleasant Valley Ranch area. That might not mean much, but it was a pioneer area where a lot of settlers came. The Pioneer Cemetery was only about a mile, maybe a mile and a half away from us, and There were numerous historical fixtures that were left in town, and an old museum that was about Oregon history that was just down the road from us as well, that showed those settlers' days. Now, I can't say with any certainty that anything happened in the house that we lived in, specifically, and especially because it was built in the 1960s, but on the land, perhaps. In the research that I've done, both recently as well as in the past when I first started to look into this, several tragic deaths plagued this area in the late 1800s to early 1900s. That may be why then strange things happened. And I can't explain exactly what, but the house always felt off. Even before things started to actually happen for me, there was just this undeniable uncomfortableness that would happen when you would walk into the house, and specifically in the upstairs. And the first time that I remember something happened, I thought maybe I dreamed it or I made it up in my head. Then things just kept happening from that point on, and they never stopped. It was Christmas time, and each year my family would not only go out and cut a Christmas tree for our living room, but also a small one for my bedroom, and I would decorate it and take care of it the whole Christmas season. And when this incident happened, I had been sick in bed with a migraine, because even back then I was plagued by migraines, and so this was something that I also took into account, thinking that perhaps, the migraine brain hangover thing that happens had caused me to see this. But when I woke up, I was on my side facing the tree, and it was up against the big window in my room, and without any warning, the entire tree just started to violently shake. Ornaments fell off, and my skin, I remember, just started to crawl. And it wasn't like a slight shake where, like maybe, I don't know, a small tremor or a door slammed or a breeze blew through. It was a violent shaking, like somebody had grabbed it and could have knocked it over with the force of the shake. And I remember adrenaline just immediately rushed through me, and I very soundlessly fled my room. I didn't scream or yell or anything. I just ran downstairs into the living room, and that truly was the first time that anything happened, both in that house and to me in general. There was never a time before then that I could say confidently that I had anything paranormal happen to me. Another time I can remember, I was playing outside, and since we lived on a hill, we had a lawn in the lower area that was flat, our driveway, and then up above there was also a lawn that went up and bordered the forest. And I remember I would play all over up until I got frightened of the upper lawn, and can remember clearly one day I was hearing something come through the woods. It was very obviously boot steps, and you could hear the leaves in the underbrush with each step. I, of course, froze. I was listening to see if at first I thought perhaps it was a cougar that was roaming the area, because we had those and I was terrified of that possibility, but I was then struck with an equally terrifying realization that it was someone walking through the woods, and you could hear their boots with each step just stomping through the forest. And I started to slowly back away, and I could feel like right in my chest just this panic. And as soon as the bootsteps came right up to the edge of the forest where you would have been able to see somebody, they just stopped. And there was no one there. I ran back to the house, again, noiselessly. I just ran. And from that point forward, I never really played in that upper lawn. I stayed on the lower lawn that was near the house, and the driveway was between me and whatever was in the woods. At night, I was terrified to go back to my room. And thinking back on it now, I can still visualize the surroundings. I can hear the sounds of home, like the dishes or dinner being cooked, and I can still feel the terror that I had knowing that I was going to have to go back upstairs by myself. Whatever it was that began tormenting me in this old house in Merlin never stopped. It came with me everywhere. I left and it left with me, so the terror is very real and recent, so I can feel it at the surface. Truthfully, I've been scared to talk about my story. I've always been worried that if I recognize it or speak about it or recognize any of the activity that still happens around me, that I will somehow acknowledge the presence and it will become active again. I say active as though it's like a dormant volcano. It's still there and very much a present danger to me, but it's not active. I've found that if I ignore this sensitivity to paranormal activity, I don't get tormented by it. It just exists. So in my adult life, sometimes all I feel is a foreign but now familiar tap on my shoulder, or something will rub a hand down my arm or a tap on my leg, or I hear stuff sometimes in the distance. I'll hear conversations that resemble something that I've heard for most of my life, whether it be a single person talking or multiple people having a conversation, and it's almost like background noise, like fuzz, like a TV that's not quite focused. And I always feel this deep sense of dread or a need to run or a need to close my eyes and pretend that it doesn't happen. And most often what I do is I choose to ignore that anything is there. I haven't seen a physical manifestation of this thing that followed me since I was a kid, and I would truthfully like to keep it that way. At night in my room in Merlin, I would hear knocking. I would see shadows both moving across the floor and in the room around me. Doors would shake when there was no reason for them to be shaking. Nobody would be there, and the wind wouldn't be blowing. And I experienced things during the day too, and mostly I was terrified at night because nobody else was awake. And the longer we lived there, the worse things got. There were times when I refused to sleep upstairs, and when my sister did finally move in with us, I would sneak into her room at night and I would sleep in there on this little couch that was in there, because I found that it wasn't tormenting me when I was in her room. And I don't know if it was her that kept me safe or her room, but the footsteps I could still hear in the hallway, almost like it was pacing, waiting for me to come out or to run downstairs like I did every night. I was terrified to go to the bathroom at night. I would rather hold it than have to wake up and essentially traverse the darkness on my own. And I can remember one time there was no choice. I was going to have to get up, and I had this habit that I wouldn't open my eyes until my light was on. And luckily I had one of those old 90s touch lamps, so it was fairly easy. And so I turned the light on, I opened my eyes, walked to the hallway. The hallway that separated my and my sister's bedroom was essentially, my room was here, there was a bathroom here, and then her room was here, and the hallway was the size of the stairwell, so tiny for a hallway. It was very close between my door to her door. And when I stood in my doorway, all I had to do was really take a right into the bathroom, but something gave me pause, and all of a sudden the door on my sister's bedroom just slammed shut. And you could feel the air, like the air just blew in my face when that happened, and there was no reason for that to have happened. Now, in times in the day and at night when I would go into the bathroom, I would hear things shuffling in my room. Toys would be moved when I would come back in, and I had this weird habit of sleeping or playing with toys in a circle around me because I felt like they were guarding me or in some way keeping me safe. And at the time, what I didn't realize, but what I did realize once I was older as an adult, is that that's very indicative of what a lot of religions do in order to form a protective circle, as they surround themselves with items or salt. And I can remember this one time I came back into my room and there were dolls in a circle on the floor in front of my closet. And it was almost as if whatever it was was mocking me. Things I can't explain have happened to me ever since I lived in that house. And in the next video, I'll tell you about the physical manifestations that started to happen, as well as more about the spirit that has followed me ever since then. Until then, make sure to like and subscribe if you want to hear more, and tell me in the comments down below if you've ever experienced anything like this. And as always, be safe, and don't forget, don't turn out the light.